swear, that night I wasn't out searching for anything. I just woke up. No real reason. Just one of those random moments when you find yourself wide awake in the middle of the night. The room was cloaked in darkness, save for the faint glow from Maya's phone screen sitting on the nightstand. If it hadn't illuminated just as I rolled over, I might not have even noticed it. There it was, Maya's phone, sitting unlocked and unattended. A message caught my eye. "I can't wait to see you, you're amazing." The name didn't ring any bells. Jordan Pritchard? My heart plummeted, and an unsettling numbness spread through me. I propped myself up, working to keep my breathing steady. At first, I thought maybe it was a harmless mix-up, like spam or a wrong number. But the knot in my stomach suggested otherwise. In hindsight, I should have just set the phone down then and there. But curiosity got the better of me. I tapped the message, and suddenly, a flood of chat logs unfolded before me. Weeks of flirty exchanges. Intimate pictures shared late at night. One message read, "Had such a good time last Thursday." That was the night Maya had claimed she was working late. Another message mentioned, "That beach trip." I remembered it all too well. It was our daughter Ella's 8th birthday weekend. Perched on the edge of the bed, I scrolled further, my hands growing cold and clammy. Maya had acted so normal that entire weekend. No, she had been even better than usual. I recalled her walking hand in hand with Ella along the shore, both of them laughing at my clumsy attempts to fly a kite. She even pulled me in for a photo, planting a kiss on my cheek that day. But here, in these messages, she was reminiscing about that same weekend as if it had been a secret rendezvous with him. It felt as if the earth had shifted beneath me. My wife wasn't merely texting someone. She was cheating on me. Next to me, Maya lay there, breathing steadily, completely oblivious to the chaos I was experiencing in the dark. Every instinct screamed at me to wake her, to shove the phone in her face and demand the truth. But I held back. I forced myself to return the phone exactly where I found it and lay back down, my heart pounding in my chest. "Stay calm, Ryan. Don't give her any hints." When the alarm rang the next morning, I was already wide awake. I dragged myself out of bed and headed straight for the kitchen to whip up breakfast, just like I always did. Maya strolled in a bit later, looking refreshed with a sleepy smile plastered on her face. She kissed me on the cheek as if nothing had changed. "Morning, babe," she said brightly, rummaging through the cupboard for plates. "Morning," I replied, my voice more strained than I intended. She didn't pick up on it. Instead, she poured herself a cup of coffee and settled down at the table with Ella, who was excitedly sharing details about some school project. I attempted to engage in their conversation, but my mind was swirling with questions. Maya appeared so normal. How could she sit there, smiling and chatting with our daughter, knowing she had been in another man's bed? When she glanced at me, her expression was relaxed and content, as if our world was perfectly intact. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if I had imagined the entire thing. But then, the heavy truth crashed down on me like a stone, pressing against my chest. The entire day unfolded in a haze, with me watching Maya through a new lens. I noticed things I hadn't seen before, or maybe I'd simply ignored them. She often stayed late at work, and when she came home, a quick peck on the lips was all she offered before she vanished into her phone. I'd asked her why she seemed so distant, and she always had some excuse ready. Just tired, or work's been hectic. But now that I knew the truth, everything became clear. I wasn't the problem. She had someone else. At one point during the day, I stepped outside into the front yard. Our neighbor, Chloe Evans, was watering her garden and waved me over. "Hey Ryan, Maya's been looking fantastic lately. That new hair color really suits her." New hair color? I blinked, momentarily thrown off. Maya hadn't mentioned anything about getting her hair done. "Yeah, it does," I mumbled, trying to keep my cool. But Chloe's words sent chills down my spine. It wasn't just her hair. It was everything. Her clothes had changed, too. They were more fitted, bolder. I thought she was just trying to feel good about herself after having Ella. But now, with everything I'd discovered, it felt as if I'd been living in a warped version of our life. one where everything seemed fine on the outside, but beneath it all things were rotting away. I could have confronted her that night. Each time she glanced at her phone, a sharp pain jabbed at my chest, wondering if it was him reaching out. But something held me back. I needed more than just gut feelings and a few text messages. If I confronted her now, she'd only lie and spin the truth. I needed solid proof. So I decided to play the waiting game. I didn't alter my behavior, didn't treat her any differently, at least not in ways she'd catch on to. But every time she left her phone unattended, I would take a quick peek, gathering whatever information I could. I even installed a tracking app, one of those hidden ones that mirrored her phone notifications to mine. Now, I could see everything she did in real time. That night, I lay beside her once more, wide awake while she slept peacefully next to me. Her hand rested lightly on my chest, just as it always did, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of guilt. What if I was wrong? What if there was a reasonable explanation for all of this? But then I remembered those messages, those damn photos of her with him. The way he spoke about her like she belonged to him. No, Ryan, you're not losing your mind. She's the one betraying you. Even still, it felt surreal. Maya had been my best friend, the woman I envisioned spending my life with. Now, every time I looked at her, all I could see were the lies. Ella's voice snapped me out of my spiraling thoughts. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked, her little brow knit with worry. I forced a smile onto my face. "Yeah, sweetheart. Just lost in thought." She nodded slowly, but the concern in her eyes hinted that she sensed something was off. And just like that, the first cracks began to show. Not only in my marriage but in the foundation of my entire life. I didn't confront Maya right away. Part of me burned with the desire to throw the phone in her face, scream at her, and demand answers. But I knew how this game played out. If I acted rashly, she would lie, twist the truth, and manipulate the situation back onto me. No, I needed to be clever about this. I needed solid evidence. So I chose to wait. I played the role of the oblivious husband. My routine stayed the same, a mask of normalcy over my brewing storm. That night, after stumbling upon the messages, I discreetly installed a hidden app on her phone, one of those stealthy apps that mirrored all her texts and notifications to mine. Each time her phone buzzed, my heart raced, knowing that her next message could be from him. But I had to know what was happening. I also rifled through our shared photo album and checked the GPS history on her phone, searching for any clue I could find. It didn't take long for the pattern to emerge. Maya frequently visited Riverside, a neighborhood on the other side of town. There was no valid reason for her to be there, none that she'd ever mentioned to me anyway. I could only surmise that Jordan lived there. Every time she claimed to be working late or hanging out with friends, she was really going there. Felt like I was trapped in someone else's horror story. I'd sit at work, phone in hand, watching the notifications come in, pretending everything was fine while my wife was out with him. One evening, when I saw she had checked in at Riverside again, I clenched my phone so tightly I thought it might snap. The most painful part wasn't just the texts or the photos. It was how at ease they were with each other. They shared inside jokes, swapped stories from their days. Stories she used to share with me. The emotional bond they had cut deeper than any physical betrayal ever could. Then came the night she claimed she was going to yoga with a friend. Maya hardly ever attended yoga classes, and when she did, it was always on weekends. Something about it felt off to me. "Yoga class tonight?" I asked, trying to sound casual, leaning against the kitchen counter as she packed her gym bag. "Yeah," she replied without a moment's hesitation. "It's been a while. Emma has been nagging me to join her." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Enjoy yourself." As soon as she walked out the door, I grabbed my keys and decided to follow her. I kept my distance, making sure she wouldn't catch on to my presence, if she even cared enough to check. Sure enough, she didn't head to any yoga studio. Instead, I trailed her all the way to a cozy cafe nestled in Riverside. And there he was, Jordan. The moment she entered the cafe, her entire demeanor shifted. Her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. She slid into the booth opposite him, and they leaned in close, their legs brushing together under the table. They laughed and exchanged playful touches, acting like two love-struck teenagers sneaking away from class. She looked genuinely happy. I sat in my car, knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. Watching them together was like a knife twisting in my chest. Seeing her with him, so comfortable, so free, was worse than anything I could have ever anticipated. I wanted to burst in, flip over the table, and confront them both right there. But I remained frozen, watching them flirt and touch as if it was the most natural thing in the world. When she finally left the cafe, she radiated a glow I hadn't seen in ages. The same glow she had when we first started dating. But now it wasn't for me, it was for him. That night, I lay beside her again, wide awake while she slept soundly, as if nothing had changed. Her breathing was soft and rhythmic, her hand brushing against mine beneath the blanket. I found myself staring at the ceiling, grappling with the haunting question of whether I could ever forgive her. Could I truly move past this betrayal? Would I ever look at her the same way again? I had no answers. In the days that followed, Maya started picking up on my shift in mood. I noticed her glancing at me more often, her eyes scanning for any hint that something was wrong. I did my best to maintain a facade of normalcy, but it was an uphill battle. I kept replaying every moment of our relationship in my mind, desperately searching for where things had gone wrong. I buried myself in work, throwing myself into projects that held no real importance. When I was at home, I'd retreat to the garage, fiddling with tools that had long gathered dust. "Everything okay, Ryan?" she asked one evening as I stood at the sink, scrubbing a plate that was already clean. "Yeah, just tired," I replied, my voice lacking conviction. Her gaze narrowed, but she didn't press me. Not yet, anyway. Ella was the only one brave enough to address the elephant in the room. One night, as I tucked her in, she looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes of hers. "Dad, why do you look sad?" she asked, her tiny voice filled with genuine concern. I felt my throat tighten. "I'm not sad, sweetheart," I lied, gently brushing a hand through her hair. "Just thinking about grown-up stuff." She didn't seem convinced, but she nestled deeper into her blankets, allowing it to slide. Maya, however, was growing increasingly suspicious. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, trying to unravel what was going on with me. She started asking more questions, attempting to engage me in forced conversations. She'd curl up next to me on the couch, leaning into my side, inquiring about my day as if she truly cared. It felt like she was trying to gauge my reaction, probing to see if I had any inkling of the truth. But I refused to give her the satisfaction of knowing she was getting to me. Instead, I began to distance myself even further. I kept my responses short and vague, just enough to deter her from digging too deep. The less I shared, the more uneasy she became. Deep down, she knew something was off, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. And that was precisely how I wanted it. The atmosphere in our home transformed. What was once filled with laughter and easy conversation had shifted to a suffocating tension. Every interaction felt like a test, a silent game of chess where we both tried to outmaneuver each other without uttering what we truly felt. I spent more nights hiding out in the garage, pretending to work on meaningless projects. Sometimes I would just sit there, staring blankly at the tools scattered across the workbench, reflecting on how my life had spiraled into this chaos. I used to cherish being home and loved spending time with my family. Now, it felt like a battlefield, and every moment with Maya was a harsh reminder of how everything I believed we shared had been a lie. Yet I still wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed more evidence. I wanted her to experience the same vulnerability I felt, to be left wondering what I knew and when I might finally snap. The waiting game was torturous, but it was my only way to maintain control. She thought she was in charge, convinced I was oblivious. But the reality was, I was meticulously observing her every move, tracking her steps. When the moment was right, I would be prepared. Catching Maya in the act wouldn't suffice. I understood that clearly now. I could confront her, throw every shred of evidence in her face, and relish in her discomfort. But what would it really change? She'd feel embarrassed, sure, but she wouldn't truly grasp the depth of my pain. She wouldn't know what it was like to feel hollow inside, watching the person you love direct their affection toward someone else. No, that wasn't enough. I needed her to understand the anguish I was enduring. I didn't plan on crossing paths with Tessa Bennett. It just sort of happened. The bar was conveniently located near my office, and one night, after a particularly awful day, I stopped in, hoping a drink might mute the chaotic noise in my head. Tessa was behind the bar, effortlessly wiping down glasses, her smile illuminating the room. She looked young, mid-20s perhaps, with dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail and tattoos peeking out from under her sleeves. "What can I get you?" she asked, glancing at me with a curious grin, as if she could sense I didn't quite belong there. "Bourbon," I muttered, settling onto a stool. She poured my drink and placed it down with a finesse that surprised me. "Rough day?" she asked. I nodded, not really in the mood for conversation, but Tessa had a knack for drawing words out of me without much effort. She didn't pry. Instead, she shared stories about her day, the quirky customers she'd encountered, and her dreams of traveling across the country in a beat-up van she was fixing with her brother. Before I knew it, I found myself sharing snippets of my life. How work felt like a drag, how things at home were strained. I deliberately left out any mention of Maya. I didn't need to. Tessa's easygoing nature made it feel as though nothing mattered in that moment. I returned to the bar the following night, and the night after that. Before long, stopping in for a drink became a part of my routine. At first, I told myself it was innocent, just a friendly ear who didn't know about the mess my life had turned into. But with each visit, the playful banter between us became more apparent. Tessa would lean in closer as she spoke, her hand brushing against mine when she passed my drink. I didn't pull away. She never bombarded me with questions. Instead, she let me be whoever I needed to be in that moment. When she laughed, it felt genuine, as if she wasn't holding back for anyone. Being around her was a breath of fresh air, allowing me to step out of my skin for a while and just breathe. One night, after a few drinks, she leaned on the bar, her eyes locking onto mine. "You know, I don't see guys like you in here very often." "Guys like me?" I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You look like you've got your life together," she smirked. "But there's something else, something heavy." I shrugged, swirling the bourbon in my glass. "Life, I guess." She didn't press for more. She simply smiled her easy smile. "Well, here's to life." We clinked glasses, and for a moment, the weight on my chest felt just a little lighter. I wasn't naive. I understood exactly what I was doing. I wasn't just frequenting the bar for the ambience. I wanted Maya to find out. I wanted her to wonder what I was up to when I wasn't home, to feel that same creeping suspicion I had lived with for months. It didn't take long for the rumors to circulate. I began dropping hints to mutual friends, nothing too blatant, just casual comments here and there. "I've been spending time with someone new," I would say, knowing the gossip would spread like wildfire. I didn't care who found out. In fact, the more people who knew, the better. One evening, I ran into Chloe Evans at the bar. She nearly dropped her drink when she saw me sitting there, chatting with Tessa like we were old friends. "Ryan?" she exclaimed, eyes wide in disbelief. "What are you doing here?" "Having a drink?" I replied, shrugging as if it were the most mundane thing in the world. Chloe's gaze flicked between me and Tessa, her expression a mix of confusion and concern. "Does Maya know you're here?" I offered her a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Why? You going to tell her?" Chloe blinked, clearly caught off guard by my tone. This isn't like you, Ryan." "People change," I replied flatly, lifting my glass to my lips. Chloe huffed, crossing her arms. "She's your wife, Ryan." "Yeah, well, I'm sure Maya is doing just fine without me." I shot back, my voice tinged with bitterness. Chloe stared at me for a moment, her expression shifting from shock to a look of pity. "I'm going to talk to Maya," she finally said, as if she believed she could patch up the fractures in our relationship. "Go ahead," I replied, my voice flat. I didn't care anymore. Let her tell Maya where I was and who I was with. Tessa raised an eyebrow as Chloe stormed out of the bar, her head shaking in disbelief. Is she a friend of yours? Something like that, I said, finishing my drink with a sense of finality. Tessa didn't ask any more questions. Instead, she smiled, and we drifted back into our usual banter, discussing everything and nothing in the same easy manner we always had. Driving home that night, a peculiar sense of satisfaction washed over me. It wasn't solely about getting revenge on Maya. It was about reclaiming a part of myself that I had lost along the way. I had no idea where things with Tessa might lead, but frankly, I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of control over my life. I wanted Maya to experience the same gut-wrenching anxiety I had endured for months. I wanted her to wonder if I was thinking of someone else when I kissed her goodnight. And if Chloe's reaction was any indication, I was well on my way to achieving that. The game had only just begun. For the first time in ages, I wasn't on the back foot anymore. It all unfolded sooner than I anticipated. One night, while I was at the bar with Tessa, reveling in a rare moment of levity, Maya burst in. One moment, Tessa and I were sharing a laugh over a silly joke, and the next, Maya's voice sliced through the low hum of conversation like a razor. So this is where you've been hiding out. I looked up to find her standing in the doorway, scanning the room until her eyes locked onto mine. Her face twisted with anger, lips drawn tight. She stormed toward us, fury radiating off her like heat from a flame. Every head in the bar turned as she approached. Who the hell is she? Maya demanded, pointing at Tessa, her eyes wild. Her voice rang out, loud and sharp, drawing everyone's attention. Tessa froze, her carefree demeanor dissipating in an instant. She shot me a look, clearly wondering what kind of chaos she had just stepped into. Maya, please don't do this here, I said, striving for a calm tone, though my heart raced in my chest. But Maya wasn't interested in reason. She stepped closer, eyes narrowed as she glared at Tessa. You think it's cute to flirt with a married man? You think this is funny? Tessa held her hands up defensively, rising slightly from her seat. I didn't know. Bullshit, Maya interjected, cutting her off. Don't pretend you're some innocent victim here. Maya, I warned, trying to assert some control. Back off. She ignored me completely. Turning to the gathering crowd, her voice grew louder and more accusatory. This jerk has been sneaking around behind my back, cheating on me with this little tramp. I leaned back in my seat, crossing my arms and forcing myself to remain calm. This was her tactic, to provoke me, to make me feel guilty and responsible. How does it feel? I asked, maintaining eye contact. How does it feel to be betrayed? For a moment she faltered, momentarily caught off guard. In that instant, I saw a flicker of guilt and fear before her mask snapped back into place. You ruined this family, Ryan, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. I rose slowly, making sure my movements were measured.
No, Maya, irrapliaste adili.
You destroyed it the moment you decided to sleep with Jordan. The bar fell into a hushed silence. Chloe, who had been seated at the far end, watched us with wide eyes, unable to look away, like a spectator at a train wreck. For just a brief moment, Maya's face paled, but then she shot back, "That's different. He was just a distraction." Tessa, clearly wanting to distance herself from this unfolding disaster, murmured, "I think I should leave." She quickly gathered her things and slipped out, leaving me and Maya in the eye of the storm, surrounded by an audience witnessing the collapse of our marriage. Maya turned her fury back on me, her eyes blazing. "You're such a coward, Ryan. You flirt with some bartender to feel better about yourself? That's pathetic." I managed a bitter smile, refusing to let her words sting. "Is it? Or is it just karma catching up with you?" When we finally got home, the argument escalated to a fever pitch. Maya slammed the door behind her and spun to face me. "You really think flirting with a bartender makes you a man?" She spat, her voice dripping with disdain. "You think this is how you solve our problems?"
No, Maya, irrapliakiatli.
"But it sure feels good to watch you squirm." She glared at me, her chest heaving with rage. Jordan didn't mean anything. I was lonely, Ryan. You were never there for me. Don't play that card with me. I shot back. You chose to cheat. Don't try to spin it into something it's not. Tears filled her eyes, but I felt no compassion. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to the folder where I'd saved everything, and held it up for her to see. You want to explain these? The photos? The messages? Or how about the GPS pings showing every time you went to Riverside? Her face fell as she grasped the reality of her situation. She was no longer in control. All her excuses and lies crumbled in an instant. It was just a distraction, she whispered, her voice breaking. Well, congratulations, I replied coldly. You distracted yourself out of a marriage. She sobbed, grasping at the remnants of her dignity. Ryan, please, I didn't mean for it to go this far. We can fix this. We can try again. But I was done. Any love I once had for her had been devoured by months of betrayal and deceit. The next day, Chloe appeared at the house, intent on mediating or trying to reason with me. She sat me down at the kitchen table, her face filled with concern. I know you're hurting, Ryan, but maybe there's still something worth saving. For Ella's sake, if nothing else. I shook my head resolutely. I can't live like this, Chloe. I can't wake up every morning wondering if she's lying to me again. I refuse to do it. People make mistakes, Chloe said softly, her voice laced with empathy. Maya, she's just human. She made her choice, I responded, my tone resolute. Now it's my turn to make mine. Chloe sighed, realizing that no amount of conversation would change my mind. I just hate to see it end like this. Trust me, I replied. It ended the day she decided to share her bed with someone else. Chloe left shortly after, leaving me in the silence of the house. Maya was likely nearby, probably crying or coming up with new excuses and apologies. But at that moment, none of it mattered. The trust was shattered, and once that bond is broken, it can never be repaired. A strange sense of clarity enveloped me as I accepted that reality. I knew it was time to act. There was no point in prolonging this charade any longer. The lies, the betrayal. It had hollowed out any love I had left for Maya. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I had been. Now, I felt utterly drained, like I had been running an endless race with no finish line in sight. But tonight would be the finale. I had made up my mind to present her with the divorce papers, to officially close this chapter of our lives, and to finally reclaim my freedom. I reserved a table at the restaurant where we had celebrated our first anniversary so many years ago. It wasn't for sentimental reasons. It felt symbolic, a way to bring closure to our journey and finally lay it to rest. Our marriage had been lifeless for quite some time. It was simply time to make it official. As I donned my jacket that evening, I noticed Ella standing in the doorway of my room, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. Her big, curious eyes regarded me closely, and I could see a whirlwind of questions brewing in her little mind. Dad? She said quietly, hugging her stuffed bear tighter. Do you and Mom still love each other? Her question hit me like a physical blow. I froze, my hands pausing mid-adjustment on my collar. For a moment, I was at a loss for words. How do you explain something so intricate to an 8-year-old? I knelt down in front of her, gently brushing her hair away from her face. Sweetheart, I whispered, I will always love you. No matter what happens, you will always be my #1 priority. She frowned, clearly not satisfied with that answer. But, do you love Mom? I pulled her into a tight embrace, fighting back the lump forming in my throat. Sometimes, I said slowly, grown-ups love each other in different ways. Sometimes that love changes. Ella remained silent, resting her head on my shoulder. I held her a moment longer, wishing I could protect her from the turmoil her mother and I had created. I love you, I whispered into her hair, meaning every word. That will never change. When I arrived at the restaurant, Maya was already seated, absently sipping water. Her smile faltered when she saw me, strained and uncertain, as if she sensed the weight of the conversation looming ahead. I slid into the chair across from her, placing my bag down quietly. "Hi," she greeted cautiously, her eyes searching my face for clues. "You look nice." I nodded but didn't reciprocate the compliment. For a few minutes, we sat in an awkward silence. Then, as if trying to bridge the growing distance, Maya began to reminisce about better days. Our honeymoon, the first house we bought, Ella's birth. Moments that had once been precious now felt like echoes of a life that no longer belonged to me. I remained mostly silent, taking slow sips of my wine and nodding at the appropriate moments. My mind was occupied, fixated on the divorce papers tucked neatly inside my bag. The longer Maya talked, the clearer it became that she was desperately clinging to something that had already slipped through her fingers. After several more minutes of strained conversation, I decided I'd heard enough. I reached into my bag, pulled out the divorce papers, and set them on the table between us. Her smile wavered, and she stared at the documents as if they were a live grenade. "This dinner doesn't mean anything to me anymore," I said coldly, meeting her gaze without flinching. Maya's hand trembled as she reached for the papers. "Ryan, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Don't do this. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." I shook my head, my expression unwavering. "There's nothing left to fix." Tears brimmed in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy, only a profound emptiness. "Please," she pleaded, her voice barely a whisper. "We can try again. For Ella. For us." Taking the pen from my pocket, I clicked it and signed the papers right in front of her, my hand steady. Then I pushed them across the table and stood up. "It's over, Maya," I said, my voice firm yet devoid of emotion. "I can't live like this anymore." She sat there, frozen, her half-finished glass of wine untouched, her hands hovering over the papers. For a moment, I thought she might utter one final plea, one last desperate attempt to change my mind. But the words never came. I turned and walked away without another glance, leaving her alone at the table. I didn't look back. Couldn't. As I reached the hallway and headed for the exit, I ran into Chloe. Her eyes widened at the sight of me, a mix of surprise and concern playing across her face. "Ryan," she said softly, "you really went through with it?" I nodded, my face an unreadable mask. "Are you sure this is what you want?" she asked gently, her tone suggesting she thought I might have second thoughts. "For the first time in my life," I said quietly, "I am absolutely certain." Chloe scrutinized my face for a moment before offering me a sad smile. "I hope you find what you're searching for," she said softly. I didn't reply. I just gave her a slight nod and stepped out into the night, feeling lighter than I had in months. There was no sense of victory, no euphoria, just closure. The chapter with Maya was finally closed. Packing my belongings wasn't as difficult as I had feared. I had anticipated it would feel heavy, like tearing myself away from a life I had built. Instead, it felt necessary, like shedding an old skin. The house was cluttered with memories I no longer wanted. Maya's scent lingering on the furniture, photographs of happier moments scattered throughout, reminders of every broken promise. I stuffed clothes into bags, loaded a few boxes into the trunk of my car, and left without any fanfare. I moved into a modest apartment in the heart of the city. It wasn't luxurious, just a one-bedroom with creaky floors and a view of a laundromat, but it was mine. There was something comforting about starting fresh with only the essentials. No ghosts lurking in the shadows, no memories suffocating me. It felt liberating. The toughest part was explaining everything to Ella. I assured her I wasn't going anywhere, that we'd still have our weekends together, and that she would always be my top priority. She nodded solemnly, trying to muster bravery, but I could see the worry etched across her little face. It broke my heart that my choices had caused her pain, but I vowed to myself that no matter what, I would always be there for her. I wouldn't allow her to feel abandoned. The weeks following the divorce blurred together in a strange haze. I poured my energy into work, into making my new apartment feel like home, and into being the best dad I could be. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. For the first time in ages, I wasn't putting on a facade. Then, one rainy afternoon, I unexpectedly ran into Tessa. I was returning to my apartment, groceries in hand, when I spotted her across the street, holding an umbrella and wearing that familiar, effortless smile. "Ryan," she called out, jogging over to me. "I thought that was you." I couldn't help but smile back. "Hey, Tessa." We stood there for a moment, a mix of awkwardness and comfort enveloping us, with the rain softly tapping against her umbrella. "You look different," she remarked, tilting her head as she studied me. "Different how?" I asked, intrigued. She shrugged. "Lighter. Happier, maybe?" I chuckled, although it felt strange to hear someone say that about me. "Divorce has a way of doing that, I guess." Her expression softened. "I'm really sorry about everything." "Don't be," I replied sincerely. "It was necessary." Tessa smiled, and for a brief moment, we stood there in the drizzle, neither of us eager to part ways. "Want to grab a coffee?" she suggested, her tone casual but hopeful. "Yeah," I replied. "I'd like that." What began as coffee turned into multiple cups shared over time, and soon enough, meeting Tessa became a delightful routine. This time felt different, no games, no ulterior motives. We simply talked about life, her ambitious van project, and anything that came to mind. She didn't pry into my past with Maya, and I appreciated that. Being with her felt like inhaling fresh air after being stuck in a stuffy room. I could finally move on without dragging the weight of the past behind me. One weekend, Ella was with me at the park when we ran into Tessa. At first, Ella was shy, hiding behind my leg. But Tessa crouched down, her smile warm and inviting. "Hey there, you must be Ella," she said. "Your dad has told me so much about you." Ella peeked out, curiosity overcoming her initial wariness. "He has." "Absolutely," Tessa replied with a playful wink. "He said you're the best artist he knows." That was all it took. Ella's face lit up, and within minutes, the two of them were sitting together on a bench, engrossed in a conversation about crayons and drawing contests. Watching them interact filled me with a sense of peace I hadn't realized I had been missing. Perhaps this was what moving on looked like, not just for me, but for Ella too. Of course, Maya wasn't finished with me yet. A few weeks later, she reached out, asking if we could meet. I agreed, more out of curiosity than anything else. We found ourselves sitting across from each other at a cafe, the same old tension hanging in the air that had marked the last months of our marriage. Maya looked worn down, as if the burden of her choices had finally caught up with her. She began, struggling to articulate her thoughts. "I want to say I'm sorry, Ryan. I know I hurt you, and I despise myself for it." I nodded, choosing silence. "I was lonely," she continued, her voice wavering. "I wasn't thinking clearly, but I never stopped loving you. Can we try again? For Ella's sake." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. A part of me had imagined what this moment would feel like, whether I would feel vindicated or if some small fragment of me would yearn for her. But as I looked at her, I realized I felt nothing. "Thank you for the experience," I said calmly. "I've grown stronger because of it. But you remained in a place I no longer want to inhabit." Her expression crumpled, but I stood firm. I wasn't trying to wound her. I was simply finished. When I returned to my apartment that evening, Tessa was waiting for me on the balcony, 2 beers in hand. She smiled as I stepped outside, the cool evening breeze brushing against my skin. "How did it go?" she asked, handing me a beer. "Exactly how it needed to," I said, settling down beside her. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. Tessa reached over, intertwining her fingers with mine, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The past didn't hold power over me anymore. It was behind me, precisely where it should be. Just as I was about to take another sip of my beer, my phone buzzed. It was a video call from Ella. "Hey, sweetie," I answered, my voice warm. "Dad, guess what?" she exclaimed, holding up a piece of paper. "I won the drawing contest at school." I smiled, my heart swelling with pride. "That's incredible, Ella." I knew you could do it. She beamed, her joy radiating through the screen. In that moment, sitting on the balcony with Tessa beside me and Ella's laughter filling my ears, I knew I had made it. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was truly living. And for the first time in a long while, I felt free.